Hi, I'm Stuart Hicks from the Architecture with Stuart YouTube channel, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. Architects design buildings, and sometimes they get a special challenge to improve on other architects' buildings. How much is too much to change? Joining us today are architects Nick Martin, whose firm recently remodeled Charles Gwathmey's Tolan house, and Matt Loader and Iain King, who were instrumental in the conservation of a Peter Womersley house in the UK. Later on, music with singer and former basketball star Jen Ash. And now, your host, not an architect, George Smart.
Thanks, Tom. After over 130 years as a profession, architecture got two big new challenges last year. What happens when highly educated people work 60 to 80 hours a week and are underpaid? Well, in September 2022, hell froze over, and an architecture firm unionized.
Wow.
Bernheimer Architecture in New York now has 22 staff members with Architectural Workers United. It's the first time a design firm has been unionized in 80 years. At the same time, we have immensely powerful artificial intelligence programs which seemingly came out of nowhere in 2023. I asked one of those, Bard, to comment on this. And Bard said, AI is already being used to automate some tasks in architecture firms that were once done by staff, like drafting and rendering. And eventually, it will automate even more, such as basic design and planning. This raises the question of whether unions can survive when AI is taking over jobs. Some people argue that unions will become obsolete as AI makes human labor less necessary. And others argue that unions will become more important as they help protect workers. That's Bard talking.
I was wondering.
Well, how'd that work out for the auto industry and robotics over the last 30 years? Not so well. One thing you can be sure of, stairwells and office bathrooms and utility closets and all the drudgery detail that goes into a building design will most certainly be automated. So in the future, when you wonder why the toilet paper roll is 6 feet up the wall, you can thank Bard, who will by then be working for Skidmore, Owens & Merrill. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs.
Nick Martin has built more than 36 homes in the posh Hamptons area of Long Island as the principal of both Martin Architects and 4MA Builders. After a childhood spent globetrotting, he studied architecture at Pratt, landing at prominent architectural firms in New York City after graduation, including Gwathmey Siegel. Nick founded his own firm in the 90s, Martin Architects, and coming full circle, Martin recently remodeled Charles Gwathmey's Tolan house, bringing new life to a modernist masterpiece. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, Nick, you were born in Colombia. What took you down there?
That's right. My family, specifically my father, they had met in Washington. My mother was a translator and archaeologist, and they took a position with AID down in Colombia. And at that point, he moved down there. My sister was born, and then I followed in Colombia, Bogota.
Was that when the early stages of the revolution was going on?
I think it was just before.
Okay.
Just before the drug cartels kind of took in. But it's a beautiful place, and certainly the U.S. is pretty interested in that area. And my father had come in as a banker/lawyer, and so it seemed to fit for him.
How long did you stay there?
About 3.5 years, and then came back to Brooklyn Heights, and then after that went to Buenos Aires, where my brother was born.
Oh, okay. So a different station for your dad.
Yeah, there was a number of different careers he's had. He's currently a writer at age 91, going into 92. So he's a very interesting super ager.
Wow, far out. Super ager, that's a new term. I haven't heard that one before. You know that one, Tom?
Well, yeah, I don't know, but I aspire to become one someday. Wow. Where do they live?
Yeah, they live in Stonington, Connecticut. We're all heading up to see him and have his 92nd, and he's in the middle of writing a wonderful book. And it's just another part of his life, another part of his career, another one of his interests.
Where did you end up going to high school?
I went to a school called the Salisbury Boarding School, which is in Salisbury, Connecticut.
Okay. And then at college, you were at Pratt.
Yeah, I did a program at Harvard. It's called the Career Discovery Program, which is essentially a very in-depth plunge into architecture. And I really thrived there and loved it. And that took me into Pratt.
The discovery process, is that exclusive for architecture, or are they trying to help you find yourself within a college setting?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. It's a fully for architecture at the GSD program. Had some wonderful professors and a great amount of diverse students, and it really launched me into the love of architecture.
When you got out, you worked for Charlie Gwathmey at Gwathmey Siegel, and one of your projects was the Michael Dell House, which is a fantastic array of buildings in Texas.
Yeah, so Charlie and Bob had a on-running program where you could apply to try to work with them in your last year, being paid in your final year of architecture. And I was able to secure that position and then kept working afterwards. Yeah, the Michael Dell House was a very large-scale project, which involved quite a few of the associates of the office, and was able to work on that project, among others, the 717 Fifth Avenue, as well as the Guggenheim Museum and a number of others. It was a fantastic period, and getting to know Charlie particularly was really one of the highlights of my career.
How long were you there?
I believe it was just under 4 years. It was a very intense and wonderful period, but it was also, I would say the thriving office worked at least 6 days a week and into the night regularly, and it was sort of an extension of college. It was a great academic place, but also a place to learn how to tread into further development in business, as well as filing and hand drawing, the beginning of CAD drawings. It was, celebrities. It was really interesting.
You were working on MTV, speaking of celebrities.
I did work after that for Ellerby Beckett, where I met Carlos Zapata and ended up working with Carlos Zapata on a number of projects. And then after that, worked with a firm called Architecture Plus Furniture, which did a number of high-end commercial projects, one of which was the MTV headquarters, which was really an interesting breakdown, deconstruction of an existing loft/commercial space into, the beginning of how rock and roll became kind of an actual visual product. So it was interesting doing the templates and the methodology to try to make that happen. And John Pacharka, who unfortunately has passed, really was a trendsetter in that.
The Michael Tolan House is a well-known Gwathmey Siegel project. It's right next door to the house Charlie built for his parents in 1966, before he was a licensed architect. Mm-hmm. And your firm was hired by the recent buyer to restore it. So how did that come about?
That's right. Well, just a nod to our clients. They were visionaries in the idea of what could happen, but also completely interested in the legacy of the project. And like other projects, we start in the architecture world, and if it works, we continue and use our sister company, Homemade Builders, to build it. Those two houses, and maybe there's a few others of that period, really were, I think, the most personified of the three-dimensional or dynamic aspect of Charlie's work. And our role was really to reimagine it. And we did actually do a permit set for a completely 5,000 square foot addition as well that included a number of programs. But the house really working there, I knew of many of the original methodologies of using the grid and breaking it down and being able to be dynamic with it. So we were able to keep much of the existing, which unfortunately at the time had been renovated a few times to a certain sort of lower level of its original. So we deconstructed all that. We actually removed some of the square footage, rebuilt it completely, added a number of interesting elements. And John Larmer of my office and I really spent quite a bit of time on that project and put a lot of love into it.
There's an Old House Beautiful article from 1972 that reveals just how specific it was to Michael Tolan's original specifications. For instance, the tennis court was the basis for the house's orientation. The house was actually built around the tennis court, which is gone now. So as a tennis guy, we know you play tennis. How hard was it to see that go?
Well, actually, there was an intention to remove it when we were doing the larger scale courtyard, but currently it exists, and we were able to resurface it and remove a lot of the typical tennis kind of thing, and instead instigate a sort of a series of blinds which act as a screen. And on the east side, there was in the normal fashion of the partie, Charlie had sort of included indoor-outdoor spaces. So rather than leaving that wall as is, we were able to introduce these semi-transparent rain screens that sort of has this interesting indoor-outdoor space. And then we disconnected the wall from the house and within the grid of the original design. So currently it is existing.
Okay. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Now, Gwathmey Siegel often included built-in furniture designed specifically for the houses. Was there any of that in this house?
Yes. So the bed and some of the living room furniture, as well as the kitchen itself, really is considered furniture. And we had Henry Built help us with that. They were wonderful to work with. And we sort of continue the tradition. A lot of our work does include furniture and more detailed pieces. So that was a joy to work with the client.
And you've added quite a bit to this house, too, with some new materials. What are those?
Yeah, so one of the idyllic methodologies originally was in using Circle Redmont glass block for Charlie. And so we took that idea and then we took it one step further. Bentheim makes this wonderful product. It's a U-channel glass, and they have this finish on it, which is called the Maestro. And basically, if you're inside of that space, you can see out quite clearly, but when you are outside, you don't see into it. So it's this wonderful semi-translucent. We ended up with some backlit LED for that. So that's on the west side bathroom, and that's sort of a beautiful element. Additionally, we added hickory rather than cedar on the inside of the house, and then followed through with a similar type of mahogany, FCS-rated mahogany. That means environmentally sourced mahogany on the outside, including a screen in the back tennis area so that if they were playing tennis, that it didn't harm the house at all. And that's a movable barn. So we were able to use those, and there's a banya there. So we have an interesting low iron glass that connects itself to an infrared sauna. And that glass is kind of a luminescent style glass. And we use some beautiful tile there and plaster. And then there's mirrors. There's some antique mirrors that have sort of a bronze effect in the gym area. So we kept searching and tried to not dilute the legacy of his work. And so each of these elements, I believe, would have been used by Charlie had they been available at the time.
Now, this house is not the only modernist house you've remodeled. Tell us about the Norman Jaffe house you worked on.
Oh, sure. So Norman Jaffe's own house, which is on Lumber Lane in Bridgehampton, originally had a larger concept, a larger master plan. But essentially, he had a courtyard schematic. And the owner at the time, this wonderful man, Konrad Dikotowski, and his wife, had this sort of love of Machu Picchu in the sense of how spaces can include trees and large-scale granite stones, and how all of that relates to the sort of the geolocation of the house relating to the sun angle. So all of that was considered. In this house, really, I feel that Jaffe did it on his budget, not the typical client budget. So there was a fair amount of rot and issues throughout. We had to pick up one of the buildings. And so our goal here, again, was to hold on to the original geometry, but refine it, and to work on how to use detailing and simple materials to try to enhance it. And that included, full cedar interior in the guest space and the studio, as well as really refining very, very simple detailing with shingle and cedar on the outside, and then bringing in quite a bit more light using glazing and 6 units, and then quite a bit of interior plaster and different finishes.
What do you find in working on these older houses that is the biggest structural challenge generally?
Yeah, we've worked on Alfred DeVito houses and a few other Jaffe houses. And in general, I think they were really all built inexpensively, generally just for the summer without considering the winter periods. And all of them structurally, I think, were really very, very bare bones. So the first thing we tend to do is a full structural overlay and reinforce everything or rebuild. Or in this case of the Jaffe and another DeVito house, we had to actually pick up portion or the entire house and redo foundations. And it's a labor of love. Fiscally is hard to imagine what it takes, but in the end, to bring these houses back to what they could be is really exciting.
That must be really fun for you because you also serve as the builder too.
That's right. So we have a sister company, and we have a few amazing project managers, including Bill Warner, who's been with me a long time. He started initially as a marine builder in Maine, ended up being full house builder, and has been with me almost since inception of Form A Builders. And so he really digs into all of the nuts and bolts of it all and comes in with really simple, clear directives and hard work. And it ends up being overall a team effort.
Do you find that the clients really like having the architect and the builder be the same entity, essentially?
I think it's arguable that we're the same. I believe, there's separate companies, separate administration. I'm the common denominator in the two, but I think what clients tend to like is to be able to be reliant on a single entity and removing the finger pointing and the triangulation that happens in the typical model of the builder and architect. So our builder firm is used by other architects, and we architects work with other builders. So we do have the more typical model, but I would say to the clients that during COVID, it was a very, very strong interest. Almost every project ended up being a MAN Form A project. And I think just being reliant on one entity or the concept of being responsible to one entity was very attractive.
Now, with all the concern in recent years about sustainability and net zero, for instance, how do you bring those technologies to these houses?
For a period, we would have to do quite a bit of explaining and selling, really, of what it takes to be a green building firm. And, we've had some lead houses that we've developed and won some awards for that kind of effort. But given the current code requirements, at least in this area, it's now a requirement to get to a certain point, and then we just take it one step further and ensure that the house is as green and net zero as possible. But that's really a pleasure, and I'd say some clients hire us for that, and others are sort of, I would say, interested in the methodology and generally are keyed right into it and are excited to be a part of it.
So for the people that are not familiar with this, what are some of the nuts and bolts of sustainability and net zero? What are the pieces, parts, the main things you have to do?
I would say that in the very basics of it, if you think of it about an object in space, the sun and the way that it works in the summer and the winter and the season in between, it's very important to understand how the dynamics of the energy of the sun can aid or subtract from the way that a house can work. So that's pretty much the reason that I became interested in architecture, is how light and its dynamics work within geometry. So if you imagine a space that's oriented properly on the land, it essentially will absorb heat and light. And our goal is that each project holds as a denominator a thought or a way of presenting energy, the dynamic energy of the sun into each room and hopefully between rooms as well. So that's the beginning of it all. Then there's something called passive solar, which is the idea of limiting the sun into certain spaces by using overhangs, rain screen trellises, light shelves, things of that nature. And then you get into more of the technical ways of then holding on to the heat. And that's the R rating of the low E glass. In other words, fine glass that's got argon in it that has either 2 or 3 layers that will hold on to the heat or cooling between the thermal break between the interior and outside. And then the same is the case for the walls. And then you speak about the combustion or how do you create heat. And one of the best ways, which isn't popular here because ultimately a lot of the people who live here live elsewhere as well, and so they come and go. It's not quite as consistent, but that's the use of geothermal in a closed loop. And that idea is you're starting heat and cooling at a mid-temperature, not a cold temperature, and then you're creating energy, and that energy is staying throughout the project. Now, how do you energize that? Well, then you'd use solar. The combination of using geothermal, solar, passive solar is just a wonderful combination. So that's sort of the heating and cooling aspect. And then you get into the supply and demand of the materials and the craft. So obviously shipping something from a far distance is not as advantageous as finding materials that are more local. And then you question where the materials come from. And then, for example, wood. Are you depleting a rainforest, or are you using a well-sourced forest that's been engineered to be able to be sustaining? So all of these questions all play into the bigger picture.
Do you actually go to the trouble of figuring out where the wood's coming from, for instance?
Oh, yes. So that's called FTS rated, and we ensure that all the wood is coming from a source that's been sustainably located and farmed, rather than the other. Now, of course, the wood may or may not be more expensive, but it's very important to us to maintain a level of morality, a moral compass of these elements.
Is that built into the building code yet, or is that something you think will be coming later, the requirement?
Yeah, I think the LEED certification sketched on that, but it wasn't really 100%. I'm also on the board for a number of years of the local architectural review board, so we see quite a few projects come and go. And unfortunately, that and switching to plantings, the idea of natives, rather than having each property have its own type of plantings, the idea of maybe we should ensure that a percentage were all native so that the overall environment promotes pollination and sustained undergrowth and tree forest gardening.
Now, which architecture review board were you on, Nick?
It's the Sagaponic Architectural Review Board. I'm the co-chair.
Okay. Now, is that the same one that's been dealing with the other Jaffe house that was going to be destroyed?
I'm not familiar with that, but unfortunately there has been a number of important modernist houses, and we on the board, as well as a number of other groups, Tim Gobbolt's another important person, have been working hard on ensuring that important houses have been kept as historic and on the docket.
Yeah. I know there's a case where this gentleman tried to have a house built 40 years ago, and the review board thought it was too ugly and wouldn't let him build it, and then finally made him put in some very expensive modifications to build it because they hated it. And now 40 years later, they won't let him tear it down.
Well, I would say education's a tough road. If you spend a lot of effort on something, whether it's art or architecture, sculpture, whatever it might be, it takes a long time for the public to catch up.
Now, what's next for you and your firm?
Well, we are proceeding with another Gwathmey house, but we've done quite a few new houses. This last couple of years, we're a strong level of clients asking us to work with them, and you'll see shortly in the press a number of important houses. One which is in Montauk overlooking the ocean, another one over the bay, another over the ocean, and they're all modernist, interesting, we're hoping timeless pieces.
You can see more of Nick's work at martinarchitects.com. And if you're interested in the houses of Charlie Gwathmey, you can see that at usmodernist.org/Gwathmey. Thanks so much for talking with us, Nick.
Hey, thanks so much. You guys are doing a great job and really appreciate all the work you do.
We were talking with Nick Martin of Martin Architects and 4MA Builders.
Matt Loader studied architecture at Edinburgh University before co-founding in 2016 the Glasgow-based firm Loader Monteith, a specialist conservation firm with a team of 6. Iain King studied architecture in Zurich and at the University of Strathclyde before joining Loader Monteith as its specialist conservation architect. Iain's projects have included the Glasgow School of Art Mackintosh building, the redevelopment of the Jenners building, the conservation of Rosslyn Chapel, made famous in the Da Vinci Code, and most recently, the conservation of High Sunderland, a modernist house designed by Peter Womersley, brought back to life in award-winning fashion. Welcome, Matt and Iain.
Thank you for allowing us to come onto your podcast.
Gentlemen, let's start with Rosslyn Chapel. It's located outside of Edinburgh in the charming town of Rosslyn. I've been there many times, right next to Sinclair Castle. Starting in the 1990s, the chapel's deterioration over the centuries required building an enormous metal shed over the top to keep out the rain and allow it to dry out over a period of, I think, about 14 years.
Wow.
The £13 million restoration and visitor center opened up in 2011, funded in part by Tom Hanks, who was in the Da Vinci Code movie. So what part of this did your firm participate in?
Well, it was my previous place of employment. I was involved with the restoration of the stonework of the chapel, and the practice was also building a visitor centre. So the book had increased the numbers of visitors coming to the chapel itself to the point where the existing facilities could no longer accommodate the interest. It a tenfold increase of thousands of visitors per month coming to visit the chapel. There was a wide master plan for the site. It's a scheduled monument, given its links to the mystery that surrounds the chapel. The building had a metal tent over it to secure the chapel itself and to protect its environment. It had been covered in cement as a way of mitigating moisture within the building because it's stone all the way through. And to protect its environmental conditions of the interior, in the 60s, the Ministry of Works had covered it in cement, which actually had a detrimental impact to the stonework. So It was a case of undoing well-meaning conservation techniques of the past. The project entailed really museum-type conservation to a building, which hadn't been done before. And this was a decade ago. So it was revolutionizing techniques and laser removal of soot and consolidating the building stone as it was, as a kind of ruin, a living ruin. So it was a very light touch conservation and really intense at the same time, with very little obvious thing at the end of it, which was the whole point of it. The premise of the conservation approach at that point was to kind of stave the hands of time and slow down the deterioration of the building and kind of slow all that process down to protect its longevity.
It's a really beautiful place to visit. I've been there several times. And now because of its fame, a lot of the cruise ships that come into the nearby port will bring buses of tourists to it. I want to tell you, too, a little story that you may not know of. Back in the 90s, there was a group called the Friends of Rosslyn who believed that there was something very special in the crypt underneath the chapel. Everyone's been talking about that now for decades, of course. And in the dark of night, they hired a drilling crew to bore sideways from an adjacent piece of land into the crypt. And they were like halfway to the crypt with this boring machine when they got caught. Mm-hmm. And Historic Scotland came in and shut them down. That was the last of the renegade.
What were they going to do once they penetrated the crypt?
They were going to
find into the tiny hole?
They were going to crawl in there and find all this kind of cool stuff that had been, suppressed. Yeah. Conspiracy theories, all that, right?
Okay.
I'm pretty sure the Ark of the Covenant somewhere around there.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But doesn't have a hole in the side of it. Close call. Why is it taking 14 years for the building to dry out? That seems very wet.
It had been open to the elements for a long time, so the Reformation had quite an impact on the building as it was mostly destroyed.
Yeah,
wow.
There's lots of
I was going to say you have visited Scotland as well, so you don't get dry patches here either. So it's going to take a while once it's out the rain to even in the moist atmosphere, to dry out sufficiently.
Got it.
Now, Matt, before your architecture career, you were very deep into rowing.
Yes.
What was that all about?
It was a really good way to misspend any time that wasn't in the library or in the architecture department drawing, I think is the answer. So I think if I hadn't become a parent 10 years ago, I might well still be doing it as well. It's along with architecture, my wife, the love of my life, of course.
Don't forget her, yes.
Where is Daddy? Oh, look way out there on the lake. There he is.
That's it. Yes. So,
I have always admired the precision that rowing requires. When I watch it on the Olympics, for instance, just how, every stroke, these oars are within, an inch or two of each other every single time.
Yeah, it is. It's and that's the fun bit that you see as well. What you don't see is the 10,000 hours that went into each and every stroke that they take, the 200 odd strokes that they take in the games. So I wasn't quite Olympic standard, I have to say, but it was a really good way of making friends. And, I met my wife through rowing and pretty much all of my best friends, with a few notable exceptions, Iain King and Ian Monteith being two of those, were made through sport. So it's certainly a big piece of my life.
So not a big rower, huh, Iain?
No.
Yes.
I'd say football, but it's soccer. It's soccer over here.
No.
Yeah. Well, we have Ted Lasso.
We know
what we're
Lasso.
talking
We
about.
know the words now. Yeah. We know all the right things to say. We're learning about the leagues. Yeah. Let's talk about High Sunderland. It was designed by British modernist Peter Womersley for, is it Bernat?
Bernat.
And Margaret Klein, two famous textile designers, built in 1957. They lived there until their deaths, and in 2017, it was sold to Juliet Kinchin and Paul Sturton. Sometime after that, during some maintenance, I believe, a fire broke out that damaged the original structure, and Juliet and Paul brought you guys in. So take us from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't maintenance. It was a really tragic turn of events, actually. So Paul and Juliet, when they bought High Sunderland, were actually resident in New York. Juliet was a curator at the Museum of Modern Art, and Paul was a professor at the Bard Institute. And their insurance on the house meant that it could only be unoccupied for a certain number of days. And so while they were tying up affairs in New York, they had a friend staying in High Sunderland. And like many old houses, it has lots of single glazing, large areas of single glazing. And so their friend lit a fire in the fireplace.
Uh-oh.
And there was a crack in the chimney, which meant hot embers made their way into the roof void and set a low-intensity fire burning. So it was a fire. It wasn't as anything as active, really, as maintenance. It was just somebody trying to stay warm while looking after the house, while complying with the insurance of the new owners. So it was a pretty tragic turn of events, really.
Really?
How much damage was there?
It was reasonably significant. The actual fire damage was fairly well contained around the chimney itself. But there was quite a lot of consequential damage, because of the water, because of the smoke and the kind of the acid that had traveled through the air. So it was about, 60% of the house maybe that was affected, Ian? It was in that order, wasn't it, that we ended up?
Yeah, there's the various degrees of it. The fire, the chimney that penetrated the roof, adjacent to that was a water tank. So consequently, as the fire broke through the roof, it actually melted the tank. And all that water came into the building. It helped extinguish the fire itself, but then you had a lot of water within the main space. And I think that the kind of material damage was limited, but the consequence of that and fire brigade coming out to extinguish the fire, there was a lot of moisture damage to the interior. So, for instance, the sunken level to the living room had 4 inches of water, just like a pool in that main space. That eventually sort of dissipated into the floor and into the ground slab and disappeared. But given the interior is principally made of wood and the structure of it's made of wood, all that moisture sitting within the building and being open to the elements and so forth, it was quite extensive. And whilst it was focused within the main living quarters of the building.
How long was it between the fire and the time that you went out to see the house for the first time?
We saw it. Paul and Juliet flew back from New York, and we arrived, I think, half an hour or an hour after they had arrived. So it was a bit like experiencing a trauma, walking in there and finding these shell-shocked owners of this beautiful modernist house that they just acquired, looking in a really sorry state.
And it's hard to describe that your own feelings in that position as well. When the house was sold on the Modern House in 2017, I think, I remember admiring the house not knowing much about it until it was sold, because it had been in private ownership since its construction. So seeing it for the first time and then physically seeing it in the sorry state that it was in, it's quite emotional for ourselves as well.
How long had they owned it by the time the fire broke out?
Oh, not more than a year, I don't think.
Yeah, it was less than that, I think. It was a matter of months.
Oh.
The house has been around since 1957, and I understand that it's A-listed. What does that mean?
In Scotland, you have different categories of listing. A being that it's of the most significance within Scotland. Like, I suppose a scheduled monument is the highest you can be, but that's preserved for ruins and castles and such like. But A is the next highest, effectively.
It means it's of national or international significance, is the tagline that comes along with an A listing.
Kind of like in the United States, the National Register of Historic Places is the counterpart
indeed.
here.
Yeah.
So what did you do to bring it back to life?
But there's a whole series of things that we did. When you confront a fire-damaged building and when you're conserving fire-damaged building, it's not like traditional conservation in the sense that you're looking at an established deterioration over time. You're looking at a building that has undergone some trauma and there's a loss of fabric. And you have to start off by unpicking the carnage that's left behind, and insofar as you have to forensically understand that building. So you go about this fact-finding mission at the beginning, where you start to record, analyse, test, and really get under the skin and the bones of how this building is put together, with a view long-term that you have to put it back. So you're working back the way from the damage, trying to understand how it was once put together in order to inform your reconstruction of it. There are various stages of restoring a fire-damaged building. First, you have to consolidate it and level off the environment of it so that it doesn't quickly start to dry out or it doesn't start to get too wet. So the first thing after clearing the site and making it safe is that you have to clean it and decontaminate it, remove all the residue of any soot and ash that might remain. And the challenge here, we had limestone flooring through the main space. And we had to test different ways of cleaning that limestone, not using any acidic or caustic cleaning methods, so that anything that you're doing in terms of the cleaning doesn't have long-term problems going forward. That's the physical stuff that you're doing in terms of the recovery. You have to then go through the next stage of research, looking back through the archives, what existing material exists beyond the building itself, understanding what changes have happened. That again informs what you ultimately decide on what you put back. And in the instance of this house, the building was listed whilst Bernard Klein still lived in it. So he made these it was his house, so he made alterations and changes without the proper procedures of getting permission to do so. But it was his house, so it's understandable.
Yeah. Everybody seems to do that, yes.
Indeed. So you have to balance really what changes had been made and what the architect's original intent were and so forth. So there was all this interrogation of the building as it was.
Did you have any drawings or original plans?
We had some, and a lot of it we had to draw ourselves. We eventually found a German article which had the original construction details. Peter Womersley in his lifetime was very well publicised for a modernist architect in Britain, but his legacy now is less popular and familiar. So there was a good cachet of drawings that we could use to understand how he'd put it together.
Now, Matt, how did you decide between replacing something as it was and using a new material as you restored the house?
Well, I think that's a really good question. And it probably does bear saying that our clients actually gave us a slightly roving brief as well. So beyond the kind of the faithful replacement of what had been lost that was there, they did also give us the brief to try and improve the environmental performance of the house at the same time. So Peter Womersley was a pioneer of this when he was building. So the house, for example, had underfloor heating, albeit electric underfloor heating. And there is absolutely no doubt that if he had been about now, he would have looked at things like super insulation, at stacking a house full of renewables. The difficulty that we had was that internally, the ceiling of the house was wood, and externally, the roof line of the building was set So what that meant is once we started to look at what materials could be used and how we applied them to what was there, how we kept the inside and the outside looking unchanged while introducing new materials that matched what was there previously was really the challenge of this, is how do you improve the performance of this house so that it looks the same as it did before, but actually hide all of that stuff away. So it was really a question of how you could do that as seamlessly as possible. So internally, one of the things that we did, historically, the underfloor heating was electric, but obviously electricity and the water that came out of the water tank, they're not friends with one another. Yeah. So what we decided was, as opposed to trying to lift the limestone flooring and put down new electric underfloor heating, what we did was in the sunken area of the living room, the wooden floor, which had been absolutely soaked, had to be lifted. So what we did was we put in a much higher performing water-driven underfloor heating system into that space. And then the original floor was sanded back, dried out, and then laid very carefully on top of that. So that hid all of that stuff without introducing new materials at all. What that also meant was that the limestone, the travertine, didn't have to be lifted through the rest of the floor as well. The main contractor that we used, the builder, was kind of an expert cabinet maker. That's their primary purpose, Lawrence Mackintosh. So they either took the pieces of furniture away and refinished them and brought them back, so the original pieces of furniture, or they left them in sight. And that really left us with the ceiling and how we dealt with that, because obviously there had been some loss of that fabric, and there did need to be new ceiling panels that went up alongside the old ones. So in terms of the material, I can't remember the name of the species of timber it was, Iain.
I think it was a Vinci.
Yeah. So it's quite a normal material for use over here in those areas. But again, it was how to finish it. And everything changes with age. So the question is, do you match it to how it is now and allow it over age to start appearing a bit more different? Or do you accept that it looks different now and over time it starts to fall into line with what's there? And I think if you look really, really carefully now, you can see the difference between the new and the original ceiling panels. But it's really incredibly well matched. And an awful lot of that is down to the talent of the contractors that we had on site that were making it.
And when did this finish up?
Well, it's all a bit fuzzy because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
This is the answer. So I think 2021 really, towards the end of it, we were just about finished, was when the photographs were taken in the kind of the autumn of 2021.
Okay. And I assume you remembered to fix the chimney, right?
Yeah,
I hope so.
Belt and braces, I would say. Yeah, we rebuilt a large section of that, and I'll tell you, no fire will ever come through that again.
That's good.
So are Juliet and Paul back in New York, or are they in the house? Where are they now?
It's their home. That's
okay.
They were retired. They were of retiring age in New York, but they are both originally from Scotland. So this was where they were to retire back to when they left their positions in New York. And so this is where they now live.
Great.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure that you look up the house on the internet, High Sunderland. The firm is Loader Monteith. Thank you both.
Thank you very much indeed
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Today's musical guest, Jen Ash, was born in Lebanon, the Paris of the Middle East.
Yes.
And raised in France.
The Lebanon of France.
Or maybe. A former professional basketball player, she is now a singer-songwriter. Somehow she passed and dribbled and three-point shot her way into the music scene in 2018 with the single Crush on You. It went to number 5 on the iTunes UK R&B chart. She's got a huge following on Spotify, and her 2023 single is Trouble, a tribute to the late Amy Winehouse. Welcome, Jen.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I got to ask about your basketball career. Where did you play and how long? And tell me about that.
I played 14 years in France. So, I moved a lot because every year is like a new city, a new contract. So I did all my school in Montpellier in the south. And then I moved to Paris and I did Bordeaux, I did Lille. So I moved around France quite a lot when I was playing basketball.
Is women's basketball in France a big deal? Do people really follow it?
Well, people follow it, but not as much as the men's sport. You always have to work on the side and, do something else because they don't pay the lady as much as the guys, but that's how it is.
Okay.
Nothing you can do.
It's sort of professional.
Yes. Well,
in that you make some money.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're getting paid for sure, but sometimes it's enough, sometimes it's not.
Endorsement deals?
Yeah. So usually you play and then you work for the association and training the kids and being part of the community. So that's how it works usually.
Women's basketball internationally is really on a rise right now, particularly in the United States. The WNBA is getting bigger crowds than they ever have.
Yeah, well, I think we deserve more than what we have because I think we're underrated and women's sport can be very interesting to watch. I'm just sad that the WNBA is only during the summer. So a lot of women has to go play in Europe. So I played with a lot of girls that were coming from America because there's nothing else during the regular season. It's only the summer.
Okay. Now, how did you find your way into rhythm and blues and singing?
Music was always a part of my life. And I feel like everybody has music in their life. I just didn't know I could sing until someone heard me and forced me to sing something. I was driving with two of my girlfriends and something on the radio pop up and I say something and she's like, wait, can you sing again? And I didn't want to sing for her. And at the end of the day, I was like, okay, you're bothering me. I'm going to sing something and you're going to let it go. And I start singing and then everybody looked at me like I was crazy. So yeah, I started taking classes and then I realized that it's something I can totally do. And I'm gifted with that voice. So it will be a waste not to do something with it.
Were you still in France at that point or were you, because right now I think you're in LA, correct?
Yeah, so I was in France. I took a few classes, but my basketball schedule was so busy. So I didn't take it as seriously as now. And then when I was done with basketball, let's just move to LA. It's a great city for artists and creatives. And everybody is so supportive of the creativity here compared to Europe.
That's true.
Here's Jen's latest single, Trouble.
After going down the freeway, I knew you were the one right away. It might sound like a cliche, meet you eyes on the hallway, feel like I can't get away. Then I on a rooftop cafe, after going down the freeway. I think it's time for you and me, baby. Don't you feel it sounds like Broadway? No, I can't get away. No, I can't get away. Let's go down the damn freeway. You and I facing Judgment Day. No, I can't get away. It's so strange, I can't explain. Feel like I'll meet you all over again. Maybe I had too much champagne, or destiny who calls all over again. Then I on a rooftop cafe, after going down the freeway. I think it's time for you and me, baby. Don't you feel it sounds like Broadway? No, I can't get to be true. Maybe if I'm taboo, do you feel me too? I think it's time for you and me, baby. Don't you feel it sounds like poetry? No, I can't get away. No, I can't get away. Let's go down the 10 freeway. No, I can't get away.
That is awesome. I really love that sax work.
Yeah, I fall in love with the saxophone. That's why I wanted to like deep dive into the music. Yeah, the saxophone make it like so much better.
Sexy.
Yeah, exactly. Give this little bluesy, jazzy vibe that I really like.
Yeah. Amy Winehouse has been gone like almost 12 years now, I think.
Oh, wow.
What a
Yeah,
tragedy.
Yeah.
I know.
I can't help in listening to this, Jen, that you should be on America's Got Talent or one of those competition shows. You could clean up. Have you thought about that?
I thought about it. I'm just like, I did few of the casting calls, and I feel like it's a big marketing things more than trying to find talent. I did the big casting call and they just barely listen to you or look at you. So I was a little disappointed by that. And I feel like at the end of the day, when you do the show and they ask to own like a big part of what you do for the next 5 years, so that bothers me on those kind of shows, you know? I'm very protective of what I do and what I write, and it's hard for me to give away some of that to like someone that doesn't put the work for me, you know?
Yeah, and how did you get into songwriting?
Well, first I had someone writing for me, and it was fun. It's just not me. So when I start writing, it added a different vibe because I write from past experience, and so I'm becoming vulnerable to people listening to my music. So it gives another tone to it. And I feel like I didn't want to write at the beginning because I thought my English wasn't good enough. So I had to like put my ego aside and put my fears aside and ask people around if that's proper English, if I can say this. I had to learn a lot.
I don't think Mick Jagger asked questions like that.
But, you know, like it's something like you ask yourself, and I have a great engineer that helps me. And I always tell him when I enter the studio, I was like, if it's wrong, please tell me. I won't take it personal. I just want to make sure it's proper English. But I realized that people don't really care about.
Well, it's got to have soul.
Yeah, exactly. That's what matters. So they turn into like more of the truth of the story than how it's rated.
Here's another of Jen's songs, Into You.
There's no way I'm leaving here with you. has got my hips moving. No way we can stop what we're doing. So caught in the moment we lose it. It feels like we've been pushed by Cupid. When the DJ stop playing this music, will you stand by my side? Promise that you'll never leave me. Can you come with me tonight? 'Cause you know we'll keep this thing going. I'ma keep you up tonight. Can nobody up and stop us now? I think we just crossed the line. I knew that when you pulled me close to you. Now your lips are touching mine. It's twisting and turning our body tight. Will you be mine tonight? There's no way I'm leaving here with you. Baby, baby, baby. Can nobody up and stop us now? I think we just crossed the line. I knew that when you pulled me close to you. Now your lips are touching mine. It's twisting and turning our body tight. Will you be mine tonight? There's no way I'm leaving here with you. Baby, baby, baby.
You sound pretty fluent there.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. It was my first one into you. I think it's one of my favorite. I didn't wrote the lyrics, but I sat down with my friend PJ and we talked about it. And he's a man writing for a woman, so it was the first for him as well. So I was like, I want this like this. I want it to be like a little sexy, like you're going to a salsa bar and then like everybody's like sweating and it's hot. And so we worked on it together and he put the words together and it worked out. And I was pretty happy about it. Yeah.
Now, Jen, your website is jenashmusic.com.
Yes.
And I notice on it that you do a cover of a Delita song. Most people in the U.S. are not familiar with Delita. I'm a big fan.
Oh.
She died now, I think, about 35 years ago or so.
Yes.
But she was huge in pretty much everywhere in the world except the U.S. Tell us about her.
She was huge. And for me, she's such an example because, you know, when I moved here, everybody's like criticizing my accent and how I said the words. And she's from Egypt and she has this accent and she's like, make her song her own. And for me, it's a big things for me. So I see her as an example that it doesn't matter your accent. It doesn't matter how you say the words. It's just like you have to be unique and embrace who you are. And this song is like one of my favorite. And I recorded the acoustic version because I'm singing live and people were very responding to it. And I think there's an Italian version of it. So in the room, it was like some Italian people telling me, oh, I know the song. And you said in French. And it's just like, she was such, you know, a queen to me. And I was a kid when my mom used to play the songs. So I have great memories of her and she was so classy and her presence was amazing. So I was happy to sing one of her songs.
I remember in watching videos of her, she had these great gowns that she would wear at various performances. Just gorgeous.
Yeah, she was always on point. I mean, for me.
Jen, thanks so much for joining us today. Your music is lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Malibu, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.2 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl with Kelly Policelli on guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another artificially intelligent edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.